The strange part was not the crash, but what happened after it. A woman crawled out of a wrecked car on a lonely Montana highway, looked at the damage around her, climbed over a fence, and walked into the dark. Her name was Patricia Bernadette Meehan, and after that moment on April 20th, 1989, no one has ever been able to prove where she went. The official record says she vanished near Circle, Montana, after a head-on collision on Highway 200. But the case does not feel like a normal missing person file because the last confirmed witnesses did not see her being taken, running, or hiding. They saw her walking away. Patricia was 37 years old, born in Pittsburgh, and by the late 1980s she was living in Bozeman, a mountain town hundreds of miles from the place where her car would later be found. According to missing person summaries, she had worked in Montana and lived a life that, from the outside, looked quiet but unsettled. The kind of life where a person can seem present in one place while already drifting somewhere else. The detail that keeps coming back is distance, because Circle is not just outside Bozeman. It is far across the state, in a landscape of long roads, ranch country, and open space where night can swallow a person quickly. On the evening of April 20th, Patricia was driving northwest on Highway 200 when her car crossed the center line and struck another vehicle head-on near the town of Circle. The people in the other vehicle survived, and the accounts that followed describe Patricia climbing from her damaged car not in panic, not screaming for help, but strangely silent. One witness account says she looked blankly at the other driver, as though the person in front of her was not quite real. Then Patricia climbed over a fence near the road and disappeared into the surrounding countryside. That is where the story becomes difficult, because in many disappearance cases there is a last phone call, a suspicious stranger, a vehicle leaving the scene, or a clear sign that violence has entered the frame. Here, the most reliable beginning is almost unbearably simple. A damaged car, a rural highway, and a woman walking away from the only people who could help her. Searchers looked for her in the days that followed, using land and air searches, but no confirmed trace of Patricia was found. If she had been injured and wandering nearby, the expectation was that someone would find footprints, clothing, a body, or at least a point where the land explained what happened. But the countryside did not give her back. One reported trail of shoe impressions was believed by investigators to possibly belong to Patricia, but accounts say it eventually faded into the terrain, a physical clue that behaved almost like a sentence cut off in the middle. The first theory was the most practical one. Patricia may have suffered a head injury or a severe psychological shock from the crash and simply walked away in a state of confusion. This explanation fits the blank stare, the silence, the strange decision to leave the scene, and the later reports of a woman who seemed disoriented in public places. But that explanation has a problem. Even a person with amnesia still needs food, shelter, warmth, and transportation. And in a region of small towns and long distances, survival without leaving some record becomes harder to understand with every passing day. Then came the sightings. In the weeks after the crash, reports began arriving from places far beyond Circle, including diners, truck stops, and roads across the northern United States. Some accounts described a woman resembling Patricia sitting alone for hours, drinking water or coffee, speaking little, and appearing detached from the world around her. According to later case summaries, thousands of alleged sightings would eventually be reported, though none led to a confirmed recovery of Patricia herself. Here's where it gets strange. If the sightings were false, then Patricia may have died very close to the crash site and the country somehow hid every trace of her. But if even one of those early sightings was real, then Patricia survived the night, left the area, and moved through public spaces while remaining unreachable. One reported sighting placed a woman resembling her in a restaurant, behaving oddly and refusing to clearly identify herself. But such reports always carry the same weakness. Resemblance is not proof. In missing person cases that reach television, the public starts searching faces everywhere, and a person who looks frightened, tired, or lost can suddenly become the missing woman everyone has heard about. The human mind is very good at turning uncertainty into recognition. Still, Patricia's case resists being dismissed as pure misidentification because the sightings did not describe a healthy woman casually starting over, but someone who seemed confused, evasive, and disconnected. That is what kept her family moving. Her relatives searched, followed leads, distributed flyers, and tried to turn rumor into direction, because each new report carried the possibility that Patricia was alive somewhere and unable to ask for help. Imagine being told that your daughter may have been seen in another state, only to arrive too late, or discover that the woman was someone else. By itself, one mistaken sighting is ordinary. Multiplied by hundreds, it becomes its own kind of haunting. The second theory is harsher, but more grounded. Patricia died after leaving the crash scene, perhaps from injury, exposure, drowning, an animal encounter, or a fall into terrain that searchers missed. Rural land can look open from the road and still contain ditches, brush, abandoned structures, culverts, and depressions where a person can vanish from sight. This theory explains the lack of contact, the lack of confirmed later identity, and the brutal silence after the crash. Its weakness is the absence of remains. Because searches were conducted, people were alert, and the case drew attention quickly enough that a nearby death should have left something behind. The third theory is voluntary disappearance, the idea that Patricia used the confusion of the accident to leave her old life behind. Supporters of this theory point to her emotional stress before the disappearance and the fact that she was far from home, already outside her usual pattern. But it asks us to believe that a person would stage no plan, survive a head-on collision, abandon identification and resources, and then successfully disappear for decades while injured or shaken. That does not make it impossible, but it makes it difficult. There is also a darker human possibility that is sometimes raised in cases like this, which is that someone found Patricia after she left the crash scene and harmed her before she could be located. This theory explains why no one could track her later movements, but it has little public evidence behind it and depends on an unknown person entering the story at exactly the right moment. No verified suspect, confession, or physical evidence has publicly anchored that version. Beyond the theories, the case touches something older than the facts themselves: the fear of becoming a stranger to your own life. Amnesia cases, fugue states, and stories of people found far from home disturb us because identity is supposed to be the one thing we carry even when everything else is taken. Patricia's disappearance asks whether a person can survive a crash and still lose the road back to herself. The Montana landscape matters here because open country can create the illusion of clarity, making people think that if someone is out there, they should be visible. But distance changes everything. A person walking in shock can cover ground in unexpected directions, and a search grid can miss a body by yards if weather, terrain, or timing works against it. At the same time, highways connect isolated places to the rest of the country, and a confused person could be offered a ride, board a bus, or drift from one public place to another without anyone realizing they had crossed paths with a missing person. That is why Patricia Meehan feels both very local and strangely national. She vanished at one fence line in Montana, but the search for her spread across diners, truck stops, newspapers, television screens, and the memories of strangers. The public record today still lists Patricia Bernadette Meehan as missing, with April 20th, 1989, as the date of last contact. There is no confirmed ending, only a scene that repeats whenever the case is retold. A woman steps out of a wrecked car. She does not ask for help. She climbs a fence. Then she walks into a landscape large enough to hold either a death, a disappearance, or a life no one ever recognized. And after all these years, the question is still waiting on that highway. Did Patricia Meehan vanish because she could not remember who she was, or because somewhere in the dark, the world forgot to find her?